You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today we'll be discussing Season 2, Episode 19, Deep Freeze. Well, Joshua, it was getting a little chilly. We were getting a little chilly. It was getting a little burly. And you could say there was a frost and a coldness sweeping over our hearts as we got really tired of this late BTAS episodes not being as great. You could say we were cooling on the series, but thank goodness we had Alexandra Bohannon to join us on our last episode, Harley's Holiday, and she's back again for Deep Freeze.
Bringing the heat.
Oh, yeah, the cosmic sizzle, the global warming, the climate change. Yeah, that's me. I'm here.
That's
Hello.
right. Co-host of Cinematic Schematics / host of one of the host of Soundtracks.
That is correct. That is me. I host Soundtrack, and I'm here talking Deep Freeze with two people that love Batman a lot.
True. It's true.
And I also love Mr. Freeze and Batman the Animated Series, which brings the question, did we like this episode? ?
Okay, wait.
Are we skipping ahead?
Let's begin to answer that question with the title card conversation.
Okay.
Right. I mean, because this is, as you will hear, dear listeners, a legitimate question about this episode.
Yeah.
But I think it starts with the title card.
Well, firstly, I don't know if it tells us much about the episode, but this title card looks A+.
Yes.
I love anytime. I'm a huge sucker for the Mr. Freeze silhouette, like the helmet with the big glowing red eyes, with the kind of the blues with the armor and stuff. I love that. I love the backdrop of the eyes. So for me, it gets cool points. It gets no pun intended. I swear to God, I get chills looking at the title card. I promise that wasn't intentional. It's true though. You know, the hairs on my looking at it, I'm like, ooh, the hairs on my arms stand up.
It's fair. It's absolutely fair. It is gorgeous.
It is
too.
beautiful.
Does it tell us much about the episode though?
I think it tells us a lot about one of the episode's 2 or 3 things that it has going on.
Correct.
Yes.
Because we have a very foreboding, distant Mr. Freeze. He stands alone. He stands apart. And that is definitely one of the things that is going on in this episode. And I would say with the whole like darked out and terrifying lantern eyes, if you'll pardon me waxing poetic, but going to the end of the show, this title card is as foreboding as the ice flows that he's living on at the end of the episode.
Ooh, that's good.
And he couldn't be more alone. He couldn't be more separate. He's separate at the beginning, metaphorically, but is also literally separate at the end. Unfortunately, that's only about one of the 3 things that's going on in this episode.
And not even the primary thing.
I mean, it's the primary thing that I care about.
I think it's the most important thing, but it's also not the thing that takes up the most screen time.
Right.
That.
It's not the plot thing. And so it tells us almost nothing. It really, it tells us nothing about the plot of this episode, but tells us everything about the themes.
The mood. But I would say
mood.
It's the mood, but it's the mood of the Mr. Freeze
Parts
stuff.
of the mood
Yes.
that we want to be the whole mood.
Yes, correct.
So as part of me answering the question of did we like this episode, I actually really did like this episode, but I liked it for like 3 different reasons, and those reasons do not overlap. Like they have nothing to do with one another. I liked all the things that this episode was doing. And it's not, I mean, I've said before that there are a lot of episodes that are half-baked or where the pieces don't all quite fit together. I almost feel like they weren't even trying. Like, these are just different things running concurrently.
They threw a bunch of stuff at the wall, and it like...
No, okay, I'm going to push back against that because I think they knew exactly what they were doing. It's just that the things that they were doing, they don't mix. They're a little bit oil and water.
Let me rephrase.
Yeah.
These guys are experimenting with a recipe, and they're like, I like this ingredient and this ingredient and this ingredient. But sometimes peanut butter, chocolate, and bananas doesn't make a great sandwich. Or actually, here,
That's a great sandwich.
That's a great sandwich. Hold on. Maybe sometimes peanut butter, chocolate, and spicy hot salsa sandwich don't always go together.
Yeah. I mean, and even then I feel, again, this is the conversation, but even using that example, I feel like that's making the elements of this episode more obviously dissonant than they are in the watching of this episode, right? Like, this episode works.
Okay, so
It doesn't leave me sitting there going, this is garbage because none of it mixes together. It's more like, as you think about it, you're like, this plot with the villain doesn't really have anything to do with the emotional center of this episode, which is Mr. Freeze.
Right.
Doesn't really have as much as we might like it to have with the aesthetic of this episode, which is sometimes Gothic Art Deco and also shark torpedoes.
Yes.
shark torpedoes.
Like,
that
I
is
feel
correct.
like the aesthetic of the episode is the part that does not mesh and work.
Right.
And the other ones are just kind of like trains running on parallel tracks.
Yeah.
Well, it just seems like so
I don't want to overplay how well they work together because
they
they really just don't even look at each other.
No, exactly. It's like there's two different things happening at the same time, and they're
Yeah.
they're overlapping, but never acknowledging the other thing. Like
Yeah.
Mr. Freeze is clearly doing his thing in this episode, and what he does makes sense. And clearly, the mastermind, like weird utopia society, is doing its thing, or dystopia. The dystopian thing
Depends on your outlook. Thank you.
And
not really.
and yes, they're happening at the same time, and yes, the plot interacts, but like Mr. Freeze never once gets campy or weird or goofy.
No.
And this goofy weird stuff never even attempts to be like thoughtful or like really reckon with the themes
Not
it's
really.
dealing with.
Yeah. To me, it felt like I was watching a Mr. Freeze episode housed by an episode of Super Friends. Like that's what
Yeah,
it feels
yeah.
like. It felt very like the stuff that wasn't Mr. Freeze felt very Saturday morning in a way that is kind of pejorative, like in my book.
No, I agree.
And like in a way that I'm like, I don't like my Batman as established by BTAS so far, like dealing with shark torpedoes. And like it just felt it's like too much. And the fact that it's like I know it's 22 minutes. I know that they have to reset after basically every episode. Like there's a vague emotional continuity, but like episode to episode, they're not going to like carry stuff over unless it's a two-parter. It's the 90s, right? So, but like
They are getting there though, because Mr. Freeze is one of the things that I think doesn't reset.
sure,
Yeah.
no, but
true.
okay. My thing though is our knockoff Walt Disney already has an established underwater
Right.
city that has people under there.
Yeah.
There are
which
no.
is
we came
surreal.
into the third act of his evil plan.
Yes, correct.
Holy
Correct.
shit.
And it kind of makes Batman look like he's bad at his job.
Yes, it
Yeah,
does.
yes, yeah.
It's like, how did this exist under Batman's nose?
There are no gods down here, only men. We'll get to that. Sorry. I just had to throw that in there. He even has a mustache, damn it.
It's so, yes. So I do think that the bigger plot stuff actually has an emotional center, but it is one that we are 100% supposed to see through the emotional center of Mr. Freeze. This idea of separation of both body and spirit, right? And how that is a very bad thing, but our villain is seeing that as a completely positive thing,
Right.
right? Like, it's not that they don't overlap at all. It's that if you're going to put that kind of level of thematic dance at play, I think you have to bring it out a little bit more in your 22-minute ostensibly kids cartoon. Like, the reason I'm prepared to talk about that is we are doing a very serious close watch of this episode, and this is what I'm looking for. It feels like to me that on every other episode of Batman the Animated Series where they have really wanted to go hard for thematic things, those thematic things are not necessarily explained in greater detail, but they tie to the A-plot much tighter, right? So it's not like this is, again, it's not bad. There is an emotional center for the plot-driven part of it. It's just there is almost no work done to tie it to Mr. Freeze. I'm only seeing it because I am looking this hard.
He
Does that
has,
make sense?
I mean, so thematically, I guess they're tying together. I guess my critique is, again, weirdly, I feel like two different things are happening at the same time and overlapping in really weird ways, but also like tonally, those stories are wildly different. I mean, because I feel like the dystopian thing, they kind of play it for laughs and play it like a
Yes.
goofy, like kind of like a golden age Machiavellian plot, like, oh, we're going to destroy
Twirl my
the world.
mustache.
Twirling, yes, absolutely.
Versus the Mr. Freeze, which is we saw in Heart of Ice. This is like a really reflective, nuanced tragedy.
Right,
you know?
like he's in a very quiet tragedy.
Yeah.
Right? Like his is very subdued.
I wish if I had like a thing, because I think the plot structure of this episode I think could work And I mean, it does work already, but like, I think it could work better if the A-plot's villainry was tonally of the same stuff as Mr. Freeze. Like,
it was also very quiet.
Subdued.
Yeah.
Like, I think like most of the pieces could work, like just swap in something that is like lower key, like the whole like I want eternal life, teach me your ways, I'm holding your dead wife hostage, like or in crypto wife hostage. Like all of those pieces I think could work with literally any villain's villainry, like I mean to an extent, like, but I think tying it to an over the top dystopian kind of like farcical kind of villain with the mustache twirl and I'm gonna destroy all of the world, freeze it over, and that it just like as a that is a miss. I think the pieces like to get Mr. Freeze, because I love this stuff that sets up that story, and you couldn't have Mr. Freeze's story in this episode without the A plot.
Yeah.
But I think the A plot could have informed, like, been better setting him up for something that's complementary instead of so contrasting.
I think you may have crystallized it for me.
Yeah.
Because just as you were saying that, because you could even do a big dystopian city where the guy is going to freeze the whole world. You could do that in a much more subdued way where he actually sort of laments that it's necessary.
Right.
And that would be more in line with Mr. Freeze. But because we do it with a big mustache twirl, shark torpedoes, almost gleeful, well, sorry, we have to kill everybody.
Yeah, Walt Disney.
Yeah.
Well,
like,
and
that's it. That's it for me. I think you got it. The reason I keep saying it isn't that it doesn't work is because it works sort of enough to kind of clunk along, but you can see that it would work so much stronger.
Yeah, if the tones had aligned with these
the villain had chilled out. Oh my God, I just
chill
did
out
it.
the villain.
How dare I? I already kind of did it with Crystallize also. I feel terrible about all of it.
No, I need to do one.
You come up with their own the own ice puns.
Winter's coming, etc.
Alex, you could say you're on thin ice if you don't come up with a pun.
The plot is definitely on thin ice.
Yeah.
So I guess I like this episode, but I also don't love it.
Like with a question mark.
I vehemently don't love it.
Well, so I'm actually really glad. Okay, so I'm really glad we did Deep Freeze because we actually had a conversation about should we do this. And I recall when I had watched it previously, I don't even remember the last time I'd seen it. I remember thinking this is a strange follow up, but I didn't remember how strange. And also, I do think this is really essential to get us to Sub-Zero, which is the next chapter for Mr. Freeze, which is. Again, haven't watched it yet, but I recall it being much better and more in line with...
Well, we center Mr. Freeze. I mean, we'll get to it,
right.
But we center him, so it's, again, all about his pathos and his separation, which is both metaphorical and also so much more literal than this guy who's just like, hooray, we get to be separate from everybody. You know?
Yeah, right.
You know?
I think it's one thing that, regardless of the A-string plot, even if Mr. Freeze's pieces were all the same with a better kind of overarching a villain plot, I think it's always very interesting having a villain like just have different like MO, like he doesn't break out of Arkham or wherever he's held. He's broken out and against his will, basically. He has such differing motivations than so many of our other cadre, our rogues gallery, and that's one thing that I think is really appealing, regardless of what's going on the A side for this plot. Like where we leave Mr. Freeze is very interesting at the end of the episode.
Well,
like,
and I mean, I think you're right, Alex, because for him, he had no reason to break out because his whole thing was about getting vengeance for Nora, and he was just locked in that cell. And then we find out throughout the episode, she actually isn't dead. Like,
I mean, he thought that, she was gone, and so he had nothing else to live for, so I'm not going to do any more villainy. Because the villainy was only done in the context of, like, I'm doing this to save my wife, which means, ergo, my choices are correct.
Yeah.
Well,
and just.
When originally it wasn't even, like, to save his wife. He thought she was dead. It was it was purely vengeance. Everything he does is, like, reflective of, like, that memory of her. And now, kind of, again... the plot thickens a little bit because, his wife's back in the fold.
We give him his heart back, right?
Yep.
And then immediately kind of wrench it away because he's not going to have the equipment or the time. I mean, well, he has the time, but I mean, he goes and lives in exile which by definition means he's not going to be able to bring her back.
Yeah. Mr. Freeze is a really interesting character. You talked about how that resets, and you're right about most of the villains. But again, going to your point you just made, Mr. Freeze is the villain they don't do that with. He only shows up, and every time he shows up, he advances or does something
very
different.
real.
And it goes all the way through Batman Beyond. Like
It's true.
And every time, because they use him sparingly enough. So for this might be one of the weaker Mr. Freeze episodes, I would say, but it gets us where we need to go for Sub-Zero to make sense. Which Sub-Zero sets us up for where he's at in the redesign. So
it is one of the weaker episodes. But the Mr. Freeze part of the episode is super strong.
It's super great.
I agree. You could really just like subtract all of the thing and keep Mr. Freeze's emotional stakes, which are why you're watching it. You're not watching it for the
we don't
over the
care
top
about this
camp
other guy.
shark torpedoes. Like you're watching it for the Mr. Freeze stakes, and that is all on par A++. You know.
Yeah. I don't even know. Honestly, I don't even know what's going on with this villain. Like, he's so generically the world is falling apart that we've belabored enough. The A plot is bad.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be bad, but it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think beautiful.
I think
it looks
very
great.
attractive aesthetic. And there endeth.
Okay, and I think we're going to talk about this in our alternate media recommendations. There are ways to make Machiavellian, like larger than life leaders like this who have the resources to build a city and all that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways to make them very compelling and very interesting. This episode in 22 minutes couldn't do that. And also we already have Ra's al Ghul, and also I'd rather just see Mr. Freeze. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we didn't need, this guy didn't need to exist.
Does this guy, like, because where we end with him and his villainy, he gets put in the Mr. Freeze accident, eternal life generator or whatever, and then he goes out to sea. He gets kind of like, taken off with the sea. Do we ever see this guy again?
I don't think so.
I want to say 90%. No, and if it does,
should.
And
honestly,
I never want to see him again.
No, but textually, we should.
Oh yeah.
He's in ice in warm waters.
Yeah,
he's gonna melt out.
Right.
Maybe he shows up in a random Superman episode.
Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled, but I really don't think so.
Yeah, because for as much of
what are you gonna do with them?
I know, but like it just you build up such a. Like, again, like this big underwater city plot underneath Batman's nose. You build all of that up in 22 minutes in a third act, like, type of villain plot. And then, like, he gets made eternal, it gives an eternal life.
Yeah.
And then he, like, you never see him again. That is such a strange choice.
As you just mentioned, Ra's al Ghul, Caleb, I'm now realizing this episode
could have just been a Ra's al Ghul episode.
If it had been Ra's breaking Mr. Freeze out to freeze the world, because I believe that he would be able to build this thing under Batman's nose.
Yes.
And they are similarly immortal, right? For different reasons. So we don't even have to mess with it. Could just be for the freeze gun. Like, I just need you to help me scale your freeze gun up instead of, because I'm already immortal. It's fine. Says Ra's, right? That would have been great, because we could have actually had, instead of it blackmail to bring Mr. Freeze in, it could have been Ra's saying, I know what it's like to lose my loved ones because of my longevity. Let me give you this back.
Right.
I believe
why didn't they
so
do
much
that?
more.
That way, that makes way more sense. Why didn't they? Because that's the thing. He's a very Machiavellian, like larger than life, take over the world villain. But we already empathize with him. They've done the legwork there for us to like be invested in that character. And two, that just makes more story sense.
The only reason that we would do what actually happened over a Ra's al Ghul plot is the aesthetic, right? This big giant Gothic Art Deco kind of metropolis, big head on a screen, that dystopia that we apparently want to flirt with but not actually do anything with, and the robot angle is the only reason we do this with somebody who isn't Ra's al Ghul, and it's not better for it. Like I love the look of this episode.
Oh yeah,
but I would trade that for a better episode all day.
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, and I think a lot of the Art Deco stuff we saw here, and even the same idea of this dystopia, was we saw the imagery and the visuals executed in Batman Mask of the Phantasm with that World of Tomorrow. Yeah. We saw the robots, we saw the Art Deco, we saw the future. Like this felt like
right. We've seen that done better.
It felt like it was similar here, but had been done better in that movie. So
the aesthetic of it actually mattered because it was that kind of weird middle space that we were having a 1930s World Fair, even though it was the 1990s. Like it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it makes sense in the story. It feels right. And here it's just like
kind of out of nowhere.
What are we doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's not, I love the look of it, but the look of it like winds up hamstringing what could have been a better episode if they weren't married to that look. Right. I mean, did we really need, we nod at continuity here. Did we need to have Rossum show back up? Are the robots really, like, as a concept on their own that interesting? They don't matter to this city.
I feel like we've generally established on an animated discussion that the robots in general, with the exception of Mask of the Phantasm, generally robots on the show, not super interesting.
I mean, we did get a really good second Hardak episode.
Well, when you're comparing it to the first one,
well, that's a low bar, but I really liked a lot of the choosing to do the right thing as humanity and Batman as the perfect moral compass and that kind of thing.
It was the most interesting version of that story they told in the show.
But we're not even doing that. Like, we just have robots to have robots. I assume it's because there aren't enough people, or all the people that are on this island are rich and won't work for themselves, so we had to automate it, I guess. But none of that's actually said on screen. It's not good. If you could just carve out the Mr. Freeze stuff, it's all A++.
Which again, the ending of this episode is perfect. Yeah. I love it.
But that leaves a bunch of, I don't want to say F, because there's some interesting, like, I really like how it looks, but definitely C-.
Yeah, C-D.
You turned this in at the last minute, kind of thing. Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, if someone, it felt definitely that it's like, okay, we have this core Mr. Freeze concept, but like we need someone to make it work. And for whatever reason, Ra's al Ghul was not on the table to make it work.
I don't want to hindsight 25 plus years later, but the minute you mentioned Ra's al Ghul, I'm like, that's a better pull. Like that's a better way to do this episode.
Yeah, it's a better way.
Totally complements it. Yeah, absolutely. Like,
and not blackmail, but handing something back. And it's not like the League of Shadows doesn't have
all the
resources to build the city and wind up with Nora and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I would believe an actual villain with a name that I can remember, not just off-brand great value Walt Disney. Like, I would believe that he could get
eviler Walt
Nora,
Disney.
like they squirrel Nora away. Like
he just happened to be an investor. It's like, okay.
Stale.
So I guess let me bring the question back though. Before we start to wrap up, like, do we think this is a recommended watch, though?
I have to say yes, but I'm not happy about saying yes.
You have to watch it, I think, to set up like emotional concepts that we see with Freeze later.
Yeah.
I feel. I mean,
but I don't like telling you have to watch it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things that does because it does establish important Mr. Freeze lore. Like, hey, Nora's still alive, and he has her in his possession.
And Mr. Freeze's parts are good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have to be mad about it. I have to say, yes, you have to watch it, but I have to be mad about it while I say it.
I say this is a C.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's not great. The overall grade's a C.
It averages to a C.
Yeah, it averages to a C. The best parts are amazing. The worst parts are blah. But you kind of have to watch it if you want to be invested in the Mr. Freeze storyline, especially if you want to watch
the movie.
Especially if you want to watch Batman Sub-Zero. I think it's essential because it really does set that up in a way that I'd forgotten wasn't set up from the end of Heart of Ice.
Well, and even, I mean, I shudder to describe this as a relatively minor plot point, but for the purposes of this episode, it's a very minor plot point that becomes a big deal to other Batman shows. This is where we establish that Mr. Freeze is effectively immortal.
Yeah. Oh, yep.
And that's going to be a thing into Batman Beyond.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I think you have to watch it, but guys, you're gritting your teeth to do it. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to do a little bit of the comic book nerdery because that's my, my angle on the show. Not just that I love Batman, but that I recognize
the things,
all the nonsense, right? And we do get...
There's some fun nonsense in this episode.
Yeah, we do get one of Batman's bigger chunks of nonsense here. Rossum made a robot that looks just like a character from the comics called Batmite. Now, I believe that neither of you are very familiar with Batmite. Is this right?
You're
No
correct.
clue. Yeah.
I've heard the term once.
Right, that's it. He makes several appearances in Batman the Brave and the Bold, my personal favorite Batman cartoon, played by Paul Rubens, and they're all delightful and very often meta and great. That's a good job for him on the Brave and the Bold. He would not have fit at all on Batman the Animated Series. So here's your vital statistics. First appearing in Detective Comics number 267, 1959.
Wow.
Batmite is a impish character who is Batman's biggest fan, according to him, to the point where he has sewn himself a very bad knockoff Batman cosplay outfit. Or his mom did? It's a little unclear. He is from the era when DC Comics was just handing out fifth dimensional imps as a story plot engine. You are probably more familiar with Superman's Mr. McShield-Splitlick.
Yes, very, very familiar with him. Yeah.
And if you're not, we're going to get to him on Superman the Animated Series. His episodes are largely pretty fun, but he's the more well-known like fifth dimensional imp. But Batman had one in Batmite. Aquaman had one in Quisp.
That is bizarre
Had
to
no
me.
clue. He better show up in Aquaman too. That's all I'm saying.
That would be delightful. I would be all over
Come
that.
on, Jason Momoa, make it happen.
And that's really, I mean, there's a lot of Batmite stories, but I don't really need to go into the details. He's basically that. Where Mr. McShield-Splitlick would show up in Metropolis specifically to make trouble, Batmite would show up to help and wind up making trouble. That's
I
basically
see.
his angle,
Okay,
right?
I dig it.
Quisp is that, but a little more malevolent. Like, in fact, the characterization that you have for Quisp in the Aquaman comics kind of becomes Mixie's in the 70s. Like, if you remember him from the Super Friends show, where he was a little eviler and a little more up to like no good instead of like actual up to badness instead of mischief. They borrow that from Quisp and give it to Mixie. But that's really your three flavors. I am here to make mischief. I am here to help, but it ends up making mischief. I am here to murder you, but I'm kind of a goofball, so I'm not going to pull it off.
He kind of comes out of nowhere in this episode. Actually, out of
so
nowhere.
does Rossum, right?
Yeah,
What
that's
are we
true.
here for? What are we doing robot things? But anyway, there's Batmite. Just a delight to see, because that's a chunk of Batman's history that, especially in the mid 90s, a lot of people, including editorial at DC, were collectively trying to ignore ever existed.
Yeah.
So I like to see it here in the dour 90s.
Yes.
Here's Batmite. But anyway, that's it. That is the beauty of Batmite. Probably, this is my last nod for him, probably used to best modern effect in Grant Morrison's story Batman R.I.P., which has not been covered on Superhero University yet, but I'm about to.
Cool.
So, and that story
Good
is
read.
amazing.
It's a good read.
It's very good.
I like Batman R.I.P. I've got it on my shelf, Ethan.
It's excellent. So that's it. There's your comic book corner of nonsense.
Love it.
We should probably move on to alternate media recommendations, all of which will be more worthwhile than spending time on this episode.
Okay. So, Joshua, you and I have a shared alternate media recommendation. So I'm going to turn to Alexandra first. Alex, how would you recommend any alternate media recommendations?
I honestly have like a fat goose egg on alternate media for this episode. Mostly just it's like hard for me to kind of marry these two disparate tones. I mean, if you want like alternate media that like kind of involve Mr. Freeze, you know what to watch.
Yeah.
It's like why
Other episodes of BTAS, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you know,
Correct.
like yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at, because like I so did not care for the A plot of this episode. I'm just like, I don't really have a single rec, and I know we've talked off mic about things, so I think you guys have the A plot kind of.
Well, I will say on the Mr. Freeze, I don't have anything specific on the Mr. Freeze end of this.
Yeah.
But I did get a very, I guess I kind of am going to back my way into one. I do get kind of a Louis from Interview with a Vampire feel from some of what Mr. Freeze says, where the villain of the piece wants to be immortal, wants to be separate, thinks that is a boon to his life. And here the person who actually had that foisted on them is saying, you don't actually want what you think you want. So I do think that there are some more like serious and introverted vampire fictions that might work well on that side.
Like only lovers left alive kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I think vampires kind of cover that kind of Mr. Freeze
the theme of like, you actually don't want to live this life sort of thing.
Yeah, and then
the more broody, again, kind of the Anne Rice end of that pool.
Yeah, and watching
gets you there.
Yeah, and watching either your loved one or like either have died, or they're not available for you to love anymore.
Yeah.
That's definitely
and people
thematically
begging you for the power where you're like, this is a curse.
Yeah.
You're dumb. That's as close as I get on that.
And you know what, though? I will say this. I think that's something we might be able to, that they do go more in depth on Mr. Freeze in a later episode after the redesign.
Yeah, definitely.
Where it's like he has nothing left to live. He's immortal and he has nothing left to live for. So it's like, yeah. Also, Tech Everlasting, guys. I mean, come on. That's a deep pull.
No,
also,
I
fondly remember, but I'm pretty sure if I read it today, I'd think it's trash. So
that was science. That was 6th grade pre-AP English.
That's right. Oh yeah. So Joshua, we're going to tag team this one, I think, but alternate media recommendation, because immediately we're watching this and we're like, A plot, obvious thing.
So I never get to do video game recs because I am not as much the video game person on this show, but I did play BioShock years and years ago. And I really feel like the people who created BioShock saw this episode and fell in love with the A plot that we don't like, or they felt like
they're like, the idea is cool.
Better. The idea is good, because there is so much similarity between the A plot of this episode and BioShock that
the premise is almost identical.
I have a very difficult time believing that there's no cross-pollination.
Yeah.
I mean, if they said there wasn't, I wouldn't call them a liar. But at the same time, it's
lodged into someone's self-conscious.
Art Deco island / underwater city that is like libertarian fascist. We have to separate ourselves, with a very Orson Welles meets Walt Disney architect of the whole thing. It's the city is BioShock top to bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. So the lead developer, who is the closest thing to he's one of the handful of game developers you could call an auteur as much as you can be in game development. His name's Ken Levine. And I don't think in all of his years talking about BioShock he ever mentioned Batman the Animated Series Deep Freeze, but I think it's unmistakable. Like
again, if he said no, I wouldn't look him in the eye and go, you're lying, because who knows? But I mean, the overlap, that Venn diagram is a circle, you guys.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's why I wanted to touch on. You talked about how this was such a boring A plot, and you're right, it is. BioShock goes way more in depth. Fleshes out way more. They really paint the kind of evil Walt Disney, so to speak. He's way more compelling and interesting. His name's Andrew Ryan. The whole I made the nod to it earlier. No God, there are no gods down here, only men.
Yeah.
Like he is driven by that kind of libertarian, exceptionalist philosophy that he is better, and that the only true innovation comes from no regulation, no oversight.
Sure,
and, of course, that's why in BioShock it's called Rapture. And that's why it implodes on itself.
Is that individual immortal as well?
No.
Or is okay.
No, but he's trying to be. But he's trying to be.
They're trying to be. And his presence is over all of the gameplay. At least the first game that I played. Like he is omnipresent.
Yes.
In the way that you feel like this immortal character would become for the city, and it's already like big faces on screens.
Well, you see like statues and stuff when you first walk in, but also there's like the way the story in that game is delivered is through like these audio diaries that you pick up along the way, and almost he's a presence throughout that game. Like if you're not looking at the imagery, even for other characters, audiobooks, they're talking about like either talking about him or talking about things that happened because of him. That kind of drove the city to madness. And he was trying to achieve immortality with the city, kind of working with the scientists.
Yeah.
And that's how you get splicers.
See, like, and that's the thing is like, okay, over time, like that kind of plot could tonally match the Mr. Freeze stuff. Like it very well could, like underwater Machiavellian city, even the art style, all of that could match, but over just 22 little minutes.
Does
like
not.
you can't compress that
Right.
kind of.
I'll put it this way: if Mr. Freeze were to be, if Victor Freeze were to have been one of the scientists that he had brought to Rapture in the games, it would have not been.
Would have made sense.
It would have made
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
But I do want to piggyback off of that too and say BioShock Infinite in some ways. That's the I guess the sequel. It's not like a direct sequel to that story. It's like technically set in the same universe, but it's totally different story, different characters. It's set in 1912, like at a city in the sky, and kind of the same idea of like we are transcending humanity. That one's that leader is driven more by like religious fanaticism. Very different type of kind of cultish cult of personality leader named Comstock. But the reason I mentioned that one is Rapture. They weren't planning to destroy the planet.
Right. They were just separating themselves and letting Ayn Randian Darwinianism take over from there.
Yeah. And the difference between BioShock Infinite is that they, again, driven kind of by some more of those early evangelical ideas, they did plan to go and like take back the world through like fire and destroy the planet and kind of rebuild it in the image of God sort of thing. So there's some overlap there like that. I think BioShock Infinite, maybe not the same aesthetic, but like in this one, he did plan to freeze the planet, and in Infinite, they actually did plan to go and destroy the people who stood against them, you know?
Well, that about wraps up this animated discussion. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, Joshua, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, video games, and all sorts of other pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief and film critic at the Cinematropolis, and we publish these in-depth essays on all types of different films, oftentimes including science fiction and superhero films, all the stuff you'd want to read about. And you can find all these articles at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough at Joshua Unruh. And remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. I'm very excited to let the listener know that Alexandra will return once again in our next episode.
Just like Mr. Freeze, I will return. Oh, and I will also return like our next episode, too.
That is going to be Season 2, Episode 20, Batgirl Returns, the series season finale, the end of Batman the Animated Series. Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.